because the important thing is that should be controlled. That realization came quite late.
And after that being controlled, so but the US very interestingly did not really want information to be controlled. Well, it's not just really want information to seem like it's being controlled even after like the whole point is a lot of surveillance.
Seems to be
But before that, it was there was a fair degree of freedom with respect to free flowing information. Simply both generally has been like mostly about this kind of contextualizing of communication within American where media as a
the most important one. So most important one for that. The being of media. And Trump keeps on
couple of times he said media
evidence that shows trying to understand the evolution of
say for example he says
what to exclude and what to present. Kind of, it's kind of agenda setting.
so what is the bureaucracy?
Media is not an evil.
let's say it's not a preordained form. So human experience things happen.
Like for example we can say oxygen.
Yeah.
Oxygen is that you can't see its existence.
Yeah.
Through experiment.
But now
It's over encompassing and
and social media has had a part to play in that kind of convergence.
so this how this being is we have to take this how we have to do the period of time. This is journey of last 100 years.
Broadly, main ground between both the Bhakti movement and so it is coming out of Hindu broader but it is also articulating religious vision. Think of this idea of gods and all. The British, it wasn't like a national thing. Oh yeah, it's the beef thing.
So they realize that when you mix religion with state, it is going to cause problems to us. So let's just keep it like so we will they keep it separation. And hence, I think
Dominions was there, but not specifically someone like
exactly
at 50s.
so
When Gandhi died, it was because they were afraid कि अच्छा जो language हमें समझ नहीं आता
It's like when you are not backed by your own, what else violate layers? So you always see that they take a fast action, swift action, forget that they catch someone who has no links to is a lone wolf kind of thing. Like the US media usually says that they think that it's going to end up in a ratio.
that cartel what you're doing.
The anti-state media is gasping for air. There is no moral. They are gasping for air to maintain some kind of credibility or media as an institution. These things and the same thing is with the legacy media is so uncomfortable for them to take a stand for. I'm sure there's a lot of journalists, even in the US news, who want to say a lot of stuff.
From early 90s, late 90s,
Into the account
India moved from real industrial thing. So if you open us, that's one opens like the number one biggest please open us, you will see actual news will be only 4-5 and rest all is who did what, who consumed how. So how they are moving from news to entertainment.
within agenda is
So then other person asked me, I remember. So then you remember I have something familiar with it.
There is this
Then this said,
loaded,
Twin Tower.
I would say,
And then
campaign
the
for news coverage
and then
of BJP,
they said that,
which is also creating
America, so like how they
the question really is that
the
the
market
same
and how they
media
bought the product
conceptualization
was
of
war
India
against
being
the
with India
and
in India picks it up and it becomes a very nominal information news. A completely nominal draft, like this film like Anand, you know, they say that the one-line screenplay में कहता है एक आदमी था बहुत हंसता था बहुत हंसता था लोगों को हंसा हंसा के वो बन गया that is the basic story of Anand. But it was developed into screenplay and it turned into let's say material which could be converted to film. So
Who will go to the ground and expose? This is a very,
of course, this is my interpretation. Maybe
no, but it's a very difficult that I think it should, it's important to kind of comment on that. When you were in function, during this time, जैसे अब क्या है, what I see is like most of television news is just reacting to social media trends, which is why the overwhelm.
personality like Narendra Modi just start
So what happened earlier, something which was happening in a closed room,
Yes,
and then media used to report it.
correct.
And obviously media was reporting it fairly, sometimes not fairly. But here the live broadcast has become a spectacle.
Sure.
So in one hand it has brought in transparency, but it
Yeah.
also, the very broadcast has become a political issue.
I'm sure it's possible some of you also discussed these issues. I'm just wondering if you go around the room and ask if there's any other angles on this set of issues
Two
that
topical topics, so that
came up. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think two things. First, I think there is there's a long history, like Peter Goodrich just kind of outlined in his work. There's a long history of kind of the relationship between the reporting of court cases as well as its dissemination into the wider public sphere. Courts have historically been both iconoclastic as well as iconographic. So
What do you mean iconophilic?
Iconophilic, yeah. So iconophobic and iconophilic, sorry.
Yeah.
So they are simultaneously heavily involved in a certain kind of image making while also being very afraid of the viral image in a sense. So court sketches have a very interesting history of being regulated by the courts, etc., by contempt laws. But within the specific case of the Indian Supreme Court, I think there is something that connects, that there is a bridge between the media reporting of cases as well as the live broadcast is something that a lot of people miss, is the reporting by bar and bench and live law, which publishes transcripts of conversations that take place between lawyers and judges in the courtroom. And the presence of that kind of transcript on social media creates a whole different media sphere around text, the relationship between text, law, and reporting, and media in general. Related to that is a classical division between what usually in legal discourse is called ratio decidendi versus obiter dicta. So ratio decidendi being the law that stays and is supposed to be precedent, versus obiter, which is supposed to be kind of
Margin area.
Yeah, but what has happened with the reporting of bar and bench and live law specifically is that a lot of the stuff that otherwise you would never really hear of has contributed to a certain kind of star-making quality with both lawyers, judges, etc. Which is why the disappointment with CGI Chandrachud, because he was such a media figure even before he became Chief Justice. People were expecting him to completely kind of radically change, but he completely kind of trashed a lot of that. That is one of the things that I wanted to say.
Yeah, so we were also talking about the question of media and law and how media needs to know what to show and what not to show. So, Elvis actually pointed out recently someone has been murdered, some COO.
So the UNC CEO was killed in New York. in December 6th. So that was a very public.
Sorry, who's
The United Healthcare CEO.
Ah, yes.
In
Thompson.
So,
Thompson. Yeah, yeah.
so
Louis
that was a very
Manuel.
publicized because there's a history of health insurance being deeply problematic in the US, and a lot of people were lauding the killing.
Yeah.
Basically saying it's just the working class coming against the bourgeoisie in a way.
That's right.
But at that time also we also had a lot of major publications writing reports that this kind of reaction is not probably appropriate.
Yeah.
They should not be. So that's like also another way of mainstream media trying to control the conversation. But I got access to this through Reddit and other social media. So there, like any posting of such news was meant with like a background said this is them trying to control us. And when he was finally caught, there was like a disappointment. But it also happened to be that he was particularly good looking. So he became a hero that way as well. And because of the public support for him, I think right now there's no jury that can be found for him. That's like one particular issue that they're having because we have to have an unbiased jury, at least in the US.
All of your discussions, remarks are bringing up this, in a way, we're still trying to absorb the novelty of media, this entity which we refer to with one word for all of its, different technological, channels and manifestations, that has been identified with some sort of natural force of freedom, as if this is an organic process of information simply moving around and, filling all available spaces. And that seems to me is what we can call, if we wanted to identify this, sort of larger post-World War II context, try to understand it, seems the Americanization of the world can be placed right here in this development, which could never have been allowed without American sponsorship, American promotion, steady American ideological, argument, and technological developments that supported these, ideological understandings, because information has always been treated as a scarce commodity, a commodity where, if necessary, artificial scarcities must be created for fear of the kind of issues you mentioned, Ajit, that, you don't know what, people with different kinds of literacy will do with it. I just want to say one thing about this question of literacy. I keep remembering what Gandhi's response was when the demand after Indian independence was that the vote should be limited to educated people. Yeah, and anybody know what Gandhi's response was? I mean, where we went with it, but Gandhi provided the argument for it. I trust the judgment of illiterate people just as much. I believe they are as capable of judging the vital things in their life as the educated people are. And I'm sure if we thought about it, we can find many instances where educated people make choices which are ruinous for the entire society, but very good for themselves. Many cases. Yeah? So, and this is also one of the remarkable aspects of Indian democracy, which we ought to applaud, ought to commemorate, ought to remember always in such discussions, which is that we are the first mass democracy that gave the vote regardless of any criteria of property, education, etc. And we made a go of it in some sense. We have had peaceful transition of government for 75 years. That, if you look at the pessimism with which such a question was regarded before, that is extraordinary. For all of our troubles, it is worthwhile hanging on to that memory, yeah, and that sort of Gandhian optimism, and trying to. So then the job would be to sort of fructify that optimism, to make it real, to realize it, and not to go back to older hesitations, which could land us in new kinds of trouble. Yeah. Now, the way in which the news comes to us always presents a sense of a crisis, an urgency, something that we must know about, something that could affect our lives, something that might change our lives, something that is non-negotiable. We have to pay attention to it. Drop what you're doing, because this is what everybody's thinking about. So, you may call it philosophical, but I want to say, is it, can we think about stepping back and ask, what is this urgency that we are continually swept away by time and time again, so that our attention is not our own, our time is not our own, what we focus on not our own, not clear how much it is going to affect us, and we move from one crisis to another, which is a kind of a society of distraction. That's one way to understand it. Not saying that's an exhaustive description. Each of the issues has importance. No doubt they need to be resolved. No doubt they require public input, but the scale of attention given to it. Here we're talking about Johnny Depp, and so there's that is something. We're not going to change it by this conversation, but it's important to have another perspective on it, that we're not obliged to ricochet along with the media ricocheting of information. Yeah. Now, the first question you asked about trauma, a more difficult one. Yeah. Because, as I said yesterday, there is always there are norms about what is permissible and what is not permissible, and with the centralization of communication, it becomes possible to play with the norms, to push the norms in one way or another, to even violate the norms and then utilize that violation for particular purposes. We are seeing each of these things happening. Furthermore, when we are dealing with global audiences, how are we going to manage the discrepancy of norms across these, highly diverse audiences? Here I'm remembering the Danish cartoon controversy. I don't know if some of you remember that. It was the Jyllands Post in Denmark, which gave their readers a competition. Draw pictures of Prophet Muhammad, and we'll publish them, the best pictures, most interesting, most provocative, whatever. And not surprisingly, the readers came up with highly insulting posters. First of all, there's a ban on depicting the Prophet. So that the idea itself was, to say, uncivil. It was not cosmopolitan. It was not respectful of the existence of a global public where sensitive feelings could be deeply violated. In fact, it was an intentional violation of those feelings. Yeah, and so while the Western countries were complimenting themselves on how much more enlightened they were, that they could violate the image of the Prophet, and because they were so enlightened, while failing to see that this was an insensitivity which they were exhibiting to the whole world. Yeah, so the question of trauma cannot be a one-sided. There's no one-sided answer to it. Yeah, it would have to be a situated discussion about a situated issue, situated problem. Here we can talk about the Nuremberg trial itself, right? The Nuremberg trial itself and the surprise, surprise, the American idea to mediatize justice, as you say, right? And that is, crimes against humanity. This notion that never before in the history of humanity had such crimes been committed. In a sense, it is true. Okay? In a sense, it is true because this was applying the technologies and techniques of industrial production to the destruction of human beings. The very beings who were supposed to benefit from industry were being rendered into the objects of destruction by supposedly the greatest achievement of civilization, which was, modern industry. Moreover, as again I think I said yesterday, uh, the technology functioned as a means of disavowing agency. That is, you could do the act and claim you did not do it because all you did was press a button. You don't know what's happening, behind the screen or behind the wall or whatever it is. So that brought up the question of what is our understanding of technology and our relationship to it. Clearly, not very deep at all, right? It is allowing us to implicate ourselves in forms of violence that we would not want to actually participate in, that we would, not actually accept at all. So this is not only about the killing machine of Nazi mass murder, that also applies to the media, which is also a set of technology or a set of technologies. And here I think we can just sort of keep this notion of the pharmacon before us against this idea of communication as a panacea, as bringing all good things always, whenever it comes, that communication is production of harmony, somehow American style, which again is a crazy idea, but maybe it even underlies some of our remarks today. It's not an idea you can get rid of very easily, I guess. We're all educated to take it seriously. So that's maybe not a comprehensive, response to many points, but if you have follow-up, I'll be happy to.
There's this other fiction movie called The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, which also does not show any scenes of horrific violence, yet it implies everything that happened during it. And in the scene, my point here is to then understand what counts as evidence, per se, if we don't show anything. In this case, the Nazi officer's son himself gets gassed because he believes that, in one of the propaganda films it is shown that the Nazi camps are like all fun and games. And there's a lot of fun and people are fed well. So he befriends a Jewish boy on the other side of the concentration camp.
This is a fictional story.
Fictional story. And there's no violence shown. It's just a friendship between two boys, a Jewish boy and a Nazi boy. And his father's stationed in one of the concentration camps as the commanding officer. So he befriends him, and then he finds out, because they're little children, so they don't understand what the concentration camp is about. So he says, my father works all day, and then he goes somewhere, I don't understand where he goes, they take him and now he's missing. I can't find him. And he is so intrigued because this boy is so bored. The Nazi boy is so bored, he has nothing to do in his, so he says, can I come to your side and play with you, since you guys are having so much fun? Because that is what is shown in the propaganda movie, that everyone's having fun in the concentration camp. So he disguises himself as a Jewish boy, supplied clothes as the prisoner. He climbs to the other side, and then he gets gassed, and that's the end of the film. So that's my point. If we didn't see it, then didn't it happen? Didn't happen. So what counts as visual evidence per se? If we don't show anything, if the media does not show any visual evidence, what counts as evidence?
Yeah, well, evidence has historically been testimony. Yeah, so you witnessed it, somebody saw it, somebody was there. So the act of witnessing is actually what historically the trial sort of consecrates and builds its case upon. And this act of witnessing is always, there's a duty in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., there is a large sign as you enter, I am your witness. I am your witness. And this is being said by basically God to Now this, that idea of witnessing, which we even have in our culture, every culture, popular understanding, common sense, my mother would say to me, I'm your Sakshi. And, she's a village girl, she's not educated. But this understanding of a kind of like juridical procedure, and the ability of ordinary people to judge is there in the culture. And what the court does is to maybe specialize it, to some extent alienate it from the living culture and segregate it, lift it above, to give it a kind of authority. So maybe what the media are doing is to restore this sense of popular ability to judge. And it is remarkable that regardless of literacy, the human capacity to judge the morality, the correctness of an event is, extends far beyond what you would think of as, the educated skills and so forth. Everybody does actually have it. That is part of what we, call human. So while the ability to judge may be sort of stimulated, perhaps the ability to work through the procedure, that's where there is a lack, right? Because of sensationalism, because of market competition of different media. So then we have to, at some point, be able to also step back from the media storm and recollect the sort of blindfolded position of the goddess of holding the scales of justice. That immersion is not always helpful. Yeah. Yes.
So very interesting counterpoint to The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is actually the zone of interest.
Yes.
Because the very problem of visual evidence has been tackled in that film. Because while The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, it's actually a fairly criticized film also, because it says that deaths matter when the Nazi boy dies, but otherwise throughout the film deaths are happening, but the film doesn't really address it. I don't entirely agree with that position, but because of how melodrama as a form, etc., positions morality, but that's a different conversation. The zone of interest actually puts sound front and center, and that is where a lot of the debate about the visuality of evidence is challenged. How do you so what happens in that film is that it's the same premise. There is a family almost living like a suburban utopian lifestyle right next to a concentration camp. And the thing is, you never see any person in the concentration camp. You only see a building and you see smoke. And you hear gunshots, you hear screams, and it's all in the background. So I watched it in the theater, and it's a completely different experience if you either have earphones on or you are in the theater, because the sound, and it won the Oscar for sound design, because the sound is mixed in a way that you also hear the screams at the back of your head. You don't hear it coming from the screen. So what happens is that completely disturbs what we think of as evidence. Do you think of sound when you think of evidence? It's a very important question, and it brings back orality into the debate. It brings back the essentiality of trauma, of sound in trauma studies. And very interestingly, the only time you actually see have you seen the film?
Yeah.
So when you actually see visual evidence is towards the end, when it flashes into the present. And it's, I think, the Holocaust Museum.
Yeah. So not sure where it is.
There is a janitor who's cleaning the floors
In the end.
and you see glass. Behind glass, there are thousands. More than, I think, probably millions of shoes of discarded. That is how the film ends, and it's almost like an echo, because the film then flashes back to the Nazi officer. It's almost like the present is signaling him to stop. And it's really kind of a masterful film when it comes to representing the horrors of the Holocaust. Also, another forgotten sense is smell. because it's very interesting because what the family does is creates all these meadows in the because flowers smell nice,
Right.
and the thing is the stench of burning bodies is very very strong. They apply perfumes, all of them, so that the stench is out. It's a very fascinating kind of film. When you think of sound, it makes you think about sound, which is very neglected in evidence.
No, that's I add my voice to that recommendations.
But Shoah sir is also similar, but Shoah is extremely.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're entering this sort of field of Holocaust studies and Zionist interests, and that's another. Where are the non-Jewish people? Why is the Holocaust being weaponized? And countries being using it to terrorize. So, and while Shoah is a great film, many questions can be asked about its choices.
The same goes with similar kind of debates. Again, I'm adding to the Holocaust discussion. Schindler's List, and Spielberg himself is a Jew, and then he was asked. In fact, he was not very happy with the script because Schindler, suddenly, who is a businessman, suddenly he become a savior for the entire community. Then how that change of heart you will show it on the screen. And that's why in the entire film, there's only one instance where that girl who is wearing that red dress, only that red color is seen, and then till rest of the film is black and white. Now again, there are so many critics because only a death of a girl would cause change in heart. So again, that becomes problematic. And then Spielberg was also criticized a lot for because then millions of people are right in front of you and you are aware. And then that didn't change your heart, and suddenly one girl, little girl, and then you see her body, and then you see a glimpse of that red dress, and suddenly that change you as a person. Then again, that becomes slightly problematic. So, talking to, I just have a question, and I'm not sure about it, how to phrase it. So, I'll try at my level best. You said Mahatma Gandhi, obviously, when he said, I trust the common sense of uneducated people.
Yes.
But in India, the problem is, and this is something, it has worsened post the advent of WhatsApp and the free kind of internet provided, not free but relatively lower, cheaper internet provided by Jio. The problem is people are still not able to understand the concept of fake news. And what is happening, what media is giving them, the information which media is feeding, often for many people, what media is telling it becomes the absolute truth. So for example, very jumla of 15 lakhs and people are, I've seen many people who are spending and then thinking that you will get that money somewhere, which you are not going to get. So the point here is, in our social experience when we are living, we can see reality. But if you go back to the Gerber's very old model which talks about perceptual dimension, so there is always AB, X1, X2, X3, X4. So that X is a reality created by media. So where, somewhere what I am doing is I am trusting media and what input media is doing, and then whatever socio-cultural milieu that I am part of, whatever my ethical framework is, and the factors which are given by media, the information which is given by media, I kind of cross-check that with my own ethical framework, and then I decide what is right and wrong, and based on that I vote, based on that I participate, based on that I condemn certain people. So then that dimension becomes problematic. So somewhere people still, ethics and morality, that common understanding that people have, that's there. And again, literacy and being literate and illiterate doesn't make a difference here, because if literacy was making you a great human being, then we would have never had corruption in any of the institution anywhere, because then everybody is educated and people are working there. But the problem here is basic literacy is one aspect, and the second aspect is media literacy. And then with media literacy, plenty of manipulation is happening. And last week I was really surprised. Lokmat, which is a leading Marathi daily, and they had created front page. The front page was designed in such a way. Actually, it was an advertisement, but it was framed like a news. So, a person who is teaching media from so many years, even I thought, a few seconds ago, I got confused.
The production of doubt. And the public relations consultants would say, doubt is our product. So when there was massive evidence that smoking causes cancer, the tobacco industry generated mountains of communication to say, is the science correct? What are the scientists saying? What percentage of secure confidence can we say 100% smoke a cigarette, you will get cancer? Actually, it's very small. They are doubtful. Maybe you can smoke, and so many people, they die at 98. Bertrand Russell smoked all his life, 98. He was fine. Winston Churchill, 92, he was having a cigar in his mouth all the time. So, what is this? Doubt. The science is not perfect. So, the critique of science, which actually came from the left wing, traveled over into the right wing. And the production of doubt was then applied to climate change. Is it true? No, we can see that maybe the science is not very good. Let us examine the science very carefully. All said by non-scientific people. Yeah, so that's the kind of world we are in now.
I think recently by Alenka Zupanki in her book Dissolver was recently published. She mentioned this somewhere, but again not answering this. But I think she has addressed this somewhere.
Right.
How do I authenticate this?
Yeah. So, I think, we move from, say, to simplify the question a bit, you move from Newtonian science to Einstein.
Newton science, predictive, it's a predictive science, law-like statements about, how the world works. Einsteinian science, because, from 1903 onwards, subatomic particles and so forth. In a way, it's a production of doubt. Is light a particle or a wave? When light travels faster, what happens? And Einstein himself resisted the implications of his own theories, saying God does not play at dice. Because one was driven to, stochastic model of understanding events. So, I would say that, yes, of course there are debates in science, but this is a political use of those debates to cloud things that are perfectly clear. That if you smoke, yes, it's likely you'll get cancer. It's just, and you had people who were supporting the tobacco industry because they were paid to do so, and the extent of the willingness to work with interests that were against the public interest was very high. Yeah, and you can see that that's continuing now. All the corporations had said, yes, we want climate change. Now Trump doesn't want it. Okay, fine. Never mind, sorry. Meanwhile, we are at a breaking point in the climate. Within a few years, West Antarctic ice sheet is already cracking. Coastal cities are being inundated as we speak. So where is the rationality that, we can sort of appeal to in these kinds of issues?
Basically, with the conceptualization of media as a being, can we call Tulsi Ramayana as media?
Sure.
Because it was, converting Valmiki Ramayana, which is in Sanskrit, to local language, or to colloquial, or a language which is understood by masses.
Yeah.
It was bringing to that medium.
Absolutely.
Is, in a way, language was acting as medium in this.
Yes.
So, in a way, Tulsi Ramayana is media in many ways. The same conceptualization can be applied to, let's say, there is one very celebrated and well-honored scripture or text in Marathi that is called as Tukaramansa Gatha. It's like
and yesterday we heard about Ganeshwari.
Yes. So basically, it is about the knowledge or spirituality or that explained by Tukaram, Saint Tukaram in Tukaramansa Gatha. But a very influential community at that time, a Brahmin community, wanted to restrict that knowledge from masses. So they asked him to drown it in river Indrayani. So he complied because somewhere he felt that it is something I will have to comply. But he wanted to take some call.
He drowned his text
In river Indrayani. And for 3 days he was sitting there saying that if I'm wrong, if what I've created has no validity, let it drown. It doesn't deserve to be to exist in this world. But the story is that the entire text came up in the water, and people celebrated that day. And the people who ordered this this draconian thing, they suffered, and all those things are there. But again, that can we call Tukarama's Gatha as media, because it was like a restriction put on by a community. To overcome that, Tukaram created something, and that acted as media. So again, Jnaneshwari has similar story, that somewhere because of Jnaneshwar's father was a sannyasi, he was taken sannyas, and again he came to Grihasthashram, and Jnaneshwar was born out of the wedlock. So basically, not out of the wedlock, but after the wedding and all that. But somewhere the elites of the society felt that his Grihasthashram, Jnaneshwar's father Grihasthashram, is not valid, and they ordered Prayashchit to Jnaneshwar's father that he should kill himself and his wife. And Jnaneshwar and his three brothers and two brothers and one sister, they were orphans. And Jnaneshwar created,
because the father
he
was put to death.
Yeah, suicide. So, and that was ordered by again elites of the society back then. So Jnaneshwar actually critiqued Bhagavad Gita and created Jnaneshwari. So, and that is again in Prakrit, that's not in Sanskrit, the language which was spoken in those days in 12th century Maharashtra. So can we call Jnaneshwari as media? So that was something, the kind of discussion we had in that.
So to answer this question, I'll go to philosophy. So what do you say? Warning.
So the German philosophy, Hegel, who was Marx's most important influence, and what Hegel, responding to previous philosophical arguments by people like Kant and so on, what he tried to do was actually to reconcile religion and science through his philosophy. That was his aim, to reconcile religion and science. And he conceived of this idea of the spirit of reason. The spirit of reason, which is kind of spreading throughout the universe and infusing its influence, in every corner of the universe. And this action he calls mediation. Okay? So it is through mediation, Hegel argues, that the world is going to be brought into the sphere of reason, which is reconciled with theology, with with right values, so to say, and a process of harmonization will happen through media. So the word mediation, when Hegel used it, was about harmonization between religion, philosophy and science. Philosophy will do this work, but religion and science will be reconciled with each other through the work of mediation. What is mediation? It brings different things into contact with each other, into relationship with each other, and in the process it changes them. Right? It negates their or overcomes or changes their existing state, brings them to a new state where a durable form of reconciliation can exist. And so that was his idea. So mediation, as it was originally conceived, the concept, it had a theological component. It was a theological idea that we can bring all of the world and all of its various elements and diverse irreconcilable forces, we make them reconcile with each other. That was the kind of both reason and kind of maybe theological belief, optimism, expectation were all involved in this notion of mediation. Now, what has happened is that Hegel has become probably the most important philosopher for Western modernity, without doubt. Yeah, and incidentally, he also read Indian philosophy. He was not unaware of it. He, had interesting questions about it and so on. The choice of the word media by someone like Marshall McLuhan, who was a very well read, he knew what he was doing. He was himself a believing, devout Catholic. Yeah, the choice of media that he utilized was not also devoid of theological content. He was, in a way, a white Western male who did believe that colonization, imperialism is eventually going to reconcile all the different parts of the world and bring them to a higher and better stage of, existence. And he saw media as, technologies of communication. By naming the media, he was hearkening back to that Hegelian notion that the work of modernization, you would call it today, is good. And it will improve life and bring all of the world together into one orbit. But when the word media was used, somehow it shed that theological baggage, or we did not look at it. We were able to ignore it. Of course, we are all secular. We are not going to say God wants all of us to be, in harmony with each other. But that, as the world is growing further and further apart today, we can reflect that the optimism about media, we can be more aware of that theological root. And yes, we want to make the world reconcile and, of course, but without the false illusions that the theology might have provided then. Yeah, so to be more realistic about what communication can do and, the dangers that it also brings. You can see those dangers. Yeah.
The term mediation can be applied, it's not
necessarily something very special, so to say, everything mediates. The question is, to inquire into the process of mediation, because it's simply about, we are in the same space, the space is mediating, the light is mediating. So, having said that, we have to say something more about it. What is the meaning of that mediation? What is its significance? But mediation itself is, at that level, quite banal, right? It's happening all the time. It's simply a way of describing things.
That let me meet people who are knowledgeable and those who are wise, but let them be calm and without any ego. Martand is a tape. Martand is basically a person of great knowledge, having a lot of wisdom, but sometimes such people are not accessible, not possible to have a conversation with them. But let me meet such people who are down to earth, wise, yet very, very humble. So again, it is an explanation or somewhere ideation of media, what Yaneshwar was trying to put through Prasadam. In a way, that's my kind of
Also, the
interpretation.
context that he is probably referring to the people who were inaccessible
Right.
ostracized his family, right?
Right.
So he's also referring to them as not being calm.
No.
I'm reading into that's how I've always seen.
See, nobody's responded to this idea that the Americanization of the world
Big statement. We are demonstrating it without acknowledging it in a way.
In a way, it's like Americanization of the world.
Yeah.
We could have understood this otherwise. Rather than calling it Indian knowledge system, there is a different way of interpretation.
No, but maybe you should ask, should we talk about
de-Americanization? Is that something we need to consider? We've given ourselves without reserve. Yeah, we haven't really talked about artificial intelligence, but that is, proves all the what we've been saying abundantly. Yeah? I mean, they have no idea what will happen when algorithm-driven machines that can learn by themselves are taking decisions in nanoseconds that cannot be corrected once they are taken. And we have no idea what they're doing because we cannot think so fast. And yet, you know, yeah, tech stocks are booming and everybody wants to invest in them. And we're investing in something like a runaway train. You don't know where it's going. So Henry Kissinger, no less, wrote an essay in the Atlantic monthly or weekly, called The End of Enlightenment. And of course, being Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt came along and paid him a lot of money to write an article saying the exact opposite a few months later. And Kissinger was happy to do that also. But I thought his earlier essay was better.
So, the American media is
along fantasized about its death, destruction. They cannot imagine, a happy ending. Actually, they can't.